What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, here with my reaction video to the second round of the 2013 NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs. We had four real good series that just took place, and the final one just ended last night, and we're going to talk about them here, because there was quite a bit to go through in these series that, even though some of them ended early, really four series that were a lot closer than some of the numbers might even dictate. We'll start in the Eastern Conference with the 1v7 matchup. The Pittsburgh Penguins defeated the Ottawa Senators in the 1v7 matchup 4-1. Top scorers for the Penguins, Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang both co-lead the team with 16 points each on this playoff so far, which is only 1 point behind the playoff-leading David Krejci. Now, Chris Letang led the way in this particular series with 10 points in 5 games. Pretty big numbers there, especially for a defenseman. All leading the way for the Senators, Daniel Alfredsson had 10 points in these playoffs, and Daniel Alfredsson, Colin Greening, and Kyle Turris had 4 points each in the series against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh clearly did not like losing Game 3 because Ottawa beat them in that close game in overtime, but in Games 4 and 5 they outscored Ottawa 13-5, so clearly they did not like losing that game. Senators fans, I think, have to be asking themselves, did Craig Anderson run out of gas late in this series, or was it the team in front of him that was the ones that ran out of gas? Craig Anderson in Games 4 and 5 faced 75 shots. That's 75 shots against in 2 games. That was just way too many. You can't be giving up to a team like Pittsburgh. You can't be giving up 37.5 shots a game. It's just not going to work out in your favor. And of course, the proof is in the pudding. 13 goals against in those last 2 games. How about dem trades for the Penguins? Iginla, 12 points so far. He's a point-a-game player in these playoffs. Brandon Morrow's got 4 points. Douglas Murray on the defensive end has 3 points, as does Jussi Jokinen. The guys that they traded for in this season have combined for 22 points in Pittsburgh's 11 playoff games. So 2 points a game from that combined core. Real good numbers, of course, Iginla leading the way there. And so far on the playoffs, Tomas Vokoun is 6-1. His only loss coming in overtime against Ottawa. 14 goals against, 1.85 goals against average, and a .941 save percentage. The Penguins swapping from Marc-Andre Fleury to Tomas Vokoun has been the playoff-changing decision through the first 2 rounds, because if you don't switch to Tomas Vokoun there's no guarantee that Pittsburgh even gets out of the first round, really, because New York was having their way with Marc-Andre Fleury, and I don't know what it is. Fleury is a great goaltender. Just in the playoffs, I think it just gets into his head. But they make the change to Vokoun. They beat the Islanders in the last 2 games. They beat Ottawa 4 games out of 5. So far, it is the playoff-shaping and playoff-changing decision through the first 2 rounds. Now, in the Pittsburgh and Ottawa series, I picked the correct team, so I did correctly pick that Pittsburgh was going to win. I was off by 1 game there. I thought the series would end in 6, and it ended in 5. So correct team, -1 game. And the number 1 ranked Pittsburgh Penguins move on to face the number 4 ranked Boston Bruins, who dispatched the number 6 ranked New York Rangers in 5 games, 4-1. Now, in this series, I picked the incorrect team. I actually thought the Rangers were going to take the upset here, and I was also -1 game. I thought it would end in 6. It ended in 5. So I had the incorrect team, and I was -1 on the number of games. Top scorer for the Bruin, of course, David Krejci continues to lead the way with 17 points to lead the playoffs. Brad Marchand actually had 6 points in this series, after I specifically called him out and said, look, we're going to need more from somebody like Brad Marchand if Boston's going to win this series. He responded with 6 points in 5 games. Leading the way for the Rangers is still Derek Brassard with 12 points. Brassard, Derek Stepan, Rick Nash, and Ryan McDonough each had 3 points in this series. The Bruins won all 3 of their home games in this series and have now won 5 straight games in the playoffs at home dating back to the Toronto series. And one of the huge stories of this playoff series was the play of Boston's 4th line. Sean Thornton, Daniel Paille, and Gregory Campbell combined for 13 points, a +13 rating, 44 shots on goal, 90 hits, around 55% in the faceoff circle, averaging 15 shifts and 10 minutes each per game. This is a fourth line. Those are crazy good numbers for a 5-game series from the line that's getting shifted to the least in the rotation. It is Boston's ability to run a 4-line game that really just causes them to have so much depth and such an advantage against any opponent that can't say that they can do that. Ultimately, in this series, the Rangers did not have enough firepower. They scored more than 2 goals just once in this series, and whenever Boston turned up the pressure, the Rangers had no answer. There was no pushback from New York whatsoever in this series, and it looks like that is really the main contributing factor that cost John Tortorella his job. Obviously, the Rangers fired him earlier this week. And Boston Bruins rookie defenseman Torrey Krug. What more can you say about this guy? He is tied for first in the playoffs in defenseman goal scoring with 4. 3 of those 4 have come on the power play. And this was all with only having 1 game of NHL experience prior to the beginning of the playoffs. Now granted, in that game he did have an assist in his first ever game, but it's still only 1 game of regular season experience before you go right into playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So we're going to move to the Western Conference now, where we had 2 series that both went to 7 games. We're going to start with the 5v6 series of Los Angeles versus San Jose. The number 5 ranked Los Angeles Kings defeat the number 6 ranked San Jose Sharks 4-3. Now in this series I had the incorrect team. I honestly thought that San Jose was going to be able to beat LA one time in LA to win that series. Didn't end up happening, and the series also went 1 more game than I thought it would, as I thought it would end in 6 games. Top scorers for the Kings, Mike Richards is leading the way with 10 points so far in the playoffs, and Mike Richards and Slava Voinov each had 5 points in this series. For San Jose, leading the way was Joe Pavelski with 12 points, and Thornton, Pavelski, and Boyle each had 4 points in this series. Neither team can beat the other team on the road, and that's ultimately what this series ended up being. This was a home team series. The home team won all 7 games, and 16 of the last 17 meetings between these 2 teams have gone to the home team. So I honestly thought that was a trend that was going to break. Didn't end up happening. There you go. Justin Williams scores both of the goals in Game 7. He now has 5 goals in 4 career Game 7s. So anything in the future where the Kings happen to go to Game 7, Justin Williams looks like he's the go-to guy. The Sharks generated just 10 goals in a 7-game series. That's just not going to be good enough. This was a whole team defensive effort from the Los Angeles Kings, who have almost perfected that 1-2-2 defensive style. And to be perfectly honest, unfortunately, Antti Niemi deserved better, because the way that Niemi has played in these playoffs, a 187 goals against and a 930 save percentage, he deserved to be going to the Western Conference Final. Unfortunately, the team in front of him just could not generate enough offense around this guy. Jonathan Quick put in a Game 7 performance to remember. 13 saves in the third period, 25 saves in Game 7 in total, 195 saves throughout the whole series. He leads the playoffs with 3 shutouts, 2 of them which came in this series against San Jose, a 1.5 goals against average and a 948 save percentage. How do you beat this guy? To be perfectly honest, how in the world do you beat a guy like Jonathan Quick, just with the way he's playing now, the way he plays when it comes to playoff time? He is one of the ultimate big game performers in the National Hockey League, and it just so happens he has put LA in position to defend that Stanley Cup championship. And the final series of the second round, the 1v7 matchup in the West, had the Chicago Blackhawks defeating the Detroit Red Wings in 7 games, who, of course, Detroit was the number 7 seed there. I had the correct team here in picking that the Chicago Blackhawks would win. It went 1 extra game that I thought it would. Top scorers for the Blackhawks, Patrick Sharp and Marian Hossa co-lead the team with 11 points and co-led the team with 5 points each in this series. For Detroit, Henrik Zetterberg led the way with 12 points, Dan Cleary with 5 points in this series. This was an absolutely crazy Game 7. This was weird penalties, excitement, controversy. and a game where ultimately there were no real losers. Because a team like Detroit, who barely squeaked into the playoffs in the last 10 days of the season as a number 7 seed, were never expected, I don't think anyways, to beat Anaheim. They do that, they beat Anaheim, and they go to the second round and take the President's Trophy winning Chicago Blackhawks to overtime of Game 7. By that point, they're really playing with house money, and maybe they kind of felt like maybe they had an excuse to lose because they'd made it so far. I don't think that's really Detroit's mentality. I think that's a winning franchise and will continue to be a winning franchise. But there's really no losers here because Detroit, super, super impressive in their playoff run. But I do have to ask, after Detroit was up 3-1 in this series, I have to ask, was it a lack of mental toughness that caused Detroit to not win this series? Or was this a real testament to how good Chicago actually is? I think there's arguments to be made on both sides, but either way, for Chicago to come back from a 3-1 series deficit was huge for them. To beat a division rival, it was just a really exciting and entertaining series to watch. And I'm actually, at this point now, I'm pretty happy with the way that series went. And the real story of this series to me was Chicago's best players backed it up on the score sheets. Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Marian Hossa, Patrick Sharp, and Duncan Keith all had at least 4 points in this series. So you're talking Chicago's biggest and baddest and best players putting up the numbers that are going to propel them right into the third round. So that is it. Your playoff matchups are set. In the East, we have a 1v4 matchup of the Pittsburgh Penguins versus the Boston Bruins. We'll call this the Battle of Jarome Iginla. In the Western Conference, we have a 1v5 matchup where the Chicago Blackhawks will take on the Los Angeles Kings. Remember, no number 5 seed has ever made it to the Stanley Cup Finals since 1995. We talked about this in an earlier video. That was the New Jersey Devils. They just happened to win the cup that year. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Congratulations to my Halifax Mooseheads on winning the MasterCard Memorial Cup Tournament for the first time in their franchise's history. Hit me back on the next video where I'm going to give you my predictions for the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. I almost forgot. Who's your Conn Smythe Trophy front runner so far in these playoffs? I want to hear from you in the comments section below as far as who you think is going to win the Conn Smythe so far in these playoffs.